shattered dreams. The last champagne flute had been returned, the venue deposit forfeited, and all 178 wedding invitations now sat in a cardboard box that Olivia Bennet couldn't bring herself to throw away. Not yet. "It's just cold feet, Liv," her sister had insisted 3 days ago when Julian first expressed doubts. But it wasn't cold feet. After 4 years together and 18 months of engagement, Julian Reynolds had looked at her across their kitchen island, the one they'd picked out together for their new condo, and said the words that collapsed her world. "I can't marry you, Olivia." "I thought I could, but something's missing." "I'm so sorry." Now sitting in her half-empty apartment in Boston's South End, surrounded by boxes labeled his and hers, Olivia stared at her phone as yet another sympathetic text message arrived. Her mother again. Checking in, worried, suggesting therapy, a girls' weekend, anything to get back out there. But how could she get back out there when there felt like a minefield of sympathetic glances and whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room? Boston suddenly felt suffocatingly small. Olivia's interior design business had 3 projects on hold, all clients who were friends of Julian's family. The honeymoon villa in Santorini remained booked, non-refundable. The wedding dress hung in her closet like a ghost. "Enough," she whispered, closing the wedding planning binder with a decisive thud. She opened her laptop and began searching for flights. Somewhere, anywhere. A place where no one knew her name or her story, where no one would look at her with pity in their eyes. Portland, Oregon appeared in the search results. She'd never been to the Pacific Northwest. Julian had always preferred tropical destinations. The tickets were on sale, a last-minute deal. Without allowing herself to overthink, Olivia entered her credit card information and booked a one-way flight departing the next morning. She packed a single suitcase, choosing comfort over style. The engagement ring remained in its velvet box on the nightstand. She'd deal with that later. Right now, she needed distance, perspective, air to breathe that wasn't thick with expectations and disappointment. Her phone buzzed again. Julian. The 3rd call today. She silenced it. "Ms. Bennet, your car is here," the doorman announced through the intercom at 5:30 the next morning. The pre-dawn air felt crisp against her face as she wheeled her suitcase to the waiting taxi. Boston was still sleeping, the streets empty and quiet, as if the city itself was giving her permission to slip away unnoticed. At Logan International, Olivia moved through security in a daze. She'd never traveled alone before. Always with Julian or friends or family. Always with a detailed itinerary and reservations made months in advance. This spontaneous departure felt both terrifying and strangely liberating. Gate C-42, Portland, 6 hours and 3,000 miles away from the life that had crumbled beneath her feet. Olivia found a seat by the window and watched as planes took off into the pink-streaked morning sky, each one carrying people toward their destinations, their futures, their lives. For the first time in a week, she didn't cry. Instead, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not happiness, certainly, but perhaps the first fragile seedling of possibility. The coffee incident. Portland International Airport buzzed with mid-afternoon activity as Olivia Bennet collected her single suitcase from the baggage carousel. The 6-hour flight had left her with a stiff neck and a strange sense of displacement, as if she'd stepped not just across the country, but into an alternate universe where she wasn't poor Olivia or Julian's ex-fiancé. She hadn't slept on the plane, instead staring out the window at endless clouds while mentally cataloging all the red flags she'd ignored. Julian's hesitation when discussing children, his constant deflection whenever she'd mentioned setting a date, the way his mother had looked relieved rather than disappointed when they'd postponed the wedding the first time, citing venue issues, desperate for caffeine. Olivia headed toward a coffee kiosk in the terminal, fumbling with her phone to check the address of the small boutique hotel she'd booked during a layover in Chicago. Lost in her screen, she didn't notice the tall figure stepping into her path until it was too late. The collision sent hot liquid splashing across both of them. The paper cup crushed between their bodies before falling to the floor. "I'm so sorry," Olivia gasped, mortified as she watched dark coffee seep into the man's light blue button-down shirt. "I wasn't looking where—" "No harm done," he interrupted, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone wearing what must have been a painful amount of scalding coffee. He dabbed at his shirt with a napkin, seeming more concerned about her than his ruined clothing. Well, except to my rather mediocre airport coffee. And possibly this shirt, which honestly needed retiring anyway. Olivia blinked, caught off guard by his calm reaction. He was tall, with warm brown eyes and the kind of smile that created a single dimple in his right cheek. Not conventionally handsome, but striking in a lived-in way, with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes and slightly rumpled hair that curled at the nape of his neck. "Please, let me buy you another coffee," she insisted, already reaching for her wallet. "And pay for your dry cleaning." "Thomas Reed," he said, extending his hand instead of accepting her offer. "And trust me, this isn't the worst thing that's happened to me in an airport. That honor goes to the time I got locked in a bathroom in Frankfurt for 3 hours. Despite herself, Olivia laughed. Olivia Bennett. And I'm having trouble imagining how that's possible. Long story involving a broken door handle and my embarrassing lack of German, he said with a self-deprecating smile. So, Olivia Bennett, are you visiting Portland or heading home? Visiting. First time, actually. She hesitated before adding, it was a very last-minute decision. Something in her tone must have communicated more than her words, because Thomas's expression softened with understanding. The best adventures usually are. An announcement over the loudspeaker interrupted their conversation. A weather system moving in from the coast had delayed several outgoing flights. Thomas checked his boarding pass and sighed. Looks like I'll be enjoying the airport's hospitality for another 2 hours, he said. Since you're buying me replacement coffee anyway, would you like company while you wait for your ride? I promise not to tell any more bathroom imprisonment stories unless specifically requested. Any other time, Olivia would have politely declined. She wasn't in the habit of chatting with strangers in airports. But something about Thomas's easy manner and the thought of facing her empty hotel room alone made her nod. I'd like that, she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. They found a quiet corner in a cafe near Gate E7, away from the main thoroughfare of travelers. Over fresh coffee and a new shirt for Thomas purchased at an overpriced airport boutique, they fell into the kind of conversation that flows effortlessly between strangers who know they'll likely never meet again. Thomas owned a bookstore called Foxglove Books in a historic building downtown. He'd moved to Portland 8 years ago from San Francisco, seeking a quieter life after what he vaguely described as burning out. He had a sister in Seattle, enjoyed hiking the Columbia River Gorge, and made terrible sourdough bread despite years of trying. Olivia found herself sharing more than she'd intended. Her interior design business, her love of historical architecture, even fragmented pieces of what had happened with Julian, though she carefully avoided mentioning the canceled wedding directly. Sometimes the universe has terrible timing, Thomas said when their conversation eventually circled back to her impromptu trip. But sometimes it's perfect. As Olivia's rideshare app finally showed a driver approaching, she realized with surprise that for the first time in days, she'd gone hours without thinking about what she'd left behind in Boston. Rain-soaked revelations. This wasn't in the forecast, Thomas said, glancing up at the darkening sky as they hurried along NW 23rd Avenue. 3 days after their airport meeting, Olivia had taken Thomas up on his casual offer to show her the real Portland. What had begun as coffee at his bookstore, a charming 2-story, Victorian filled with worn leather chairs and carefully curated shelves, had evolved into an impromptu walking tour through neighborhoods she would never have discovered on her own. Welcome to Portland, Olivia replied with a laugh. Isn't unpredictable weather part of the authentic experience? The first fat raindrops began to fall, quickly transforming into a steady downpour that had them running for cover beneath the striped awning of a tiny French bakery. They arrived breathless and already damp, hair plastered to their foreheads. Authentic enough for you? Thomas asked, shaking water from his jacket. Inside, the bakery was warm and fragrant with the scent of butter and sugar. They claimed the last available table, a small round thing barely big enough for their coffee cups and a shared plate of madeleines. Olivia wrapped her cold hands around her mug, watching raindrops race down the window beside them. Portland had already begun to work its magic on her. The city's lush green spaces and eclectic neighborhoods felt healing somehow, as if each day spent exploring them washed away another layer of Boston heartache. "You're thinking too loudly," Thomas observed, studying her over the rim of his cup. "Just appreciating the moment," she said. "This trip has been unexpected. In a good way, I hope." "Definitely." She hesitated, then added, "I needed this." "More than I realized," Thomas nodded, understanding without needing details. That was something she'd come to appreciate about him. He never pushed for more than she was willing to share. "I came to Portland for similar reasons," he said after a moment. "Needed somewhere new, somewhere I could reinvent myself. From what?" The question hung between them. During their previous conversations, Thomas had skillfully redirected whenever the topic veered toward his life before Portland. "I used to be someone else," he finally said, tracing a pattern in the condensation on the window. "Someone defined by what he did rather than who he was." Thunder rumbled outside, punctuating his words. "I built a technology company in my 20s with my college roommate," he continued. "Datasphere. It started in my garage, very Silicon Valley cliché, but grew faster than we ever imagined. By 30, I was running a company valued at billions, with offices in 12 countries." Olivia blinked, trying to reconcile this information with the man who'd spent an hour that morning enthusiastically showing her his collection of first-edition Steinbeck novels. "What happened?" she asked. "Success happened. Money happened." His smile turned rueful. "And then emptiness happened. I woke up one day in this massive house overlooking the bay, surrounded by things I didn't care about, running a company that had become unrecognizable from what we'd intended. My business partner was happy with our direction, but He shrugged. "I realized I'd spent a decade building something that wasn't making the world better. Just more addicted to screens and data collection. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the awning, so I walked away. Sold my shares, donated most of the proceeds, kept enough to live comfortably but simply. Bought the bookstore from a retiring couple who were going to close it otherwise." He looked directly at her then. "I've never regretted it. Not once." Olivia understood suddenly why she'd felt so comfortable with Thomas from their first meeting. They were both starting over, just at different stages of the journey. "Does anyone here know about your past?" "A few close friends. It's not a secret exactly, just not relevant to who I am now." He leaned forward. "What about you, Olivia? Who are you becoming in Portland?" The question caught her off guard, but as she considered it, she realized she'd been changing since the moment she'd boarded that plane. Each day away from Boston had helped her rediscover parts of herself that had been compromised or forgotten during her relationship with Julian. "I'm becoming someone who makes impulsive decisions," she said with a small smile. "Someone who has coffee with strangers and walks in the rain. Someone who's learning to trust her instincts again." Thomas's hand moved across the table, his fingers lightly touching hers. "I like her already." The rain continued to fall, creating a cocoon around their small table by the window, and for the first time since arriving in Portland, Olivia wondered what it might be like to stay. The truth unveiled. The invitation to Thomas's house came after a week of daily excursions around Portland. "Nothing fancy," he'd promised. "Just dinner at my place. I make a mean risotto." Olivia had expected something modest, perhaps a small bungalow or apartment above his bookstore. Instead, the rideshare dropped her at the entrance of a secluded modern home nestled among towering Douglas firs on the outskirts of the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows captured sweeping views of the forest and, in the distance, the glittering lights of downtown Portland. It was understated but unmistakably the home of someone with significant means, a stark contrast to the humble bookstore owner persona Thomas projected. He greeted her at the door, casual in jeans and a soft gray sweater, looking slightly nervous. "I should have warned you," he said, taking her coat. "This place isn't really me. Or rather, it's not who I am now, but I couldn't bring myself to sell it." Inside, the house was a study in contradictions. Architecturally stunning but sparsely furnished. Expensive art hung beside framed vintage book covers. One entire wall was dedicated to a collection of first editions protected behind glass, while another featured photographs of Thomas with people Olivia recognized. Tech moguls, celebrities, even a former president. "This is quite the modest bookstore owner setup," she said, unable to keep the edge from her voice as she examined a picture of Thomas receiving some kind of innovation award. He winced. "I should have been more upfront." "About what exactly?" "That you're not just some guy who sells used paperbacks?" She set down her wine glass. "Who are you, really?" Thomas led her to the kitchen where risotto ingredients waited on the counter. He began to cook as he talked, the familiar movements seeming to ground him. "Everything I told you is true," he said, stirring the rice methodically. "I did build Datasphere. I did walk away. What I didn't mention is that when the company went public 3 years ago, my remaining shares became worth, well, substantially more than I'd anticipated." "How much more?" He looked up from the pot. "The IPO valued the company at $87 billion. Olivia felt the room tilt slightly. "And you owned?" 11% at that point. His eyes remained on hers, gauging her reaction. "I kept only what I needed to live comfortably and establish a foundation that funds literacy programs. The rest went to environmental conservation, education initiatives in underserved communities, and medical research." Olivia wandered to the window, processing this revelation while watching mist curl through the trees below. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman she barely recognized anymore, standing in a billionaire's kitchen, feeling both deceived and unsure why it mattered so much. "Why didn't you tell me?" she finally asked. "Because for the first time in years, someone was seeing me. Just me, without the baggage of my bank account." He abandoned the risotto to stand beside her. "Do you know what it's like when people look at you and see only what you represent instead of who you are?" The question hit uncomfortably close to home. Hadn't she been Julian's perfect accessory, the tasteful designer fiancé who complemented his rising star status at his law firm? When had he last truly seen her? "I never lied to you, Olivia," Thomas continued quietly. "I just held back a piece that usually changes everything." She turned to face him fully. "I'm leaving Portland in 3 days. My return flight is booked." It wasn't what she'd planned to say, but suddenly it seemed critical to establish this boundary, to remind both of them that whatever this was, this connection that had formed so quickly between them, had an expiration date. "I know," he said. "That's why I invited you here tonight. I wanted you to see the whole picture before you decide." "Decide what?" "Whether to stay longer, or maybe—" He hesitated. "Whether to come back someday." The timer on the stove beeped, breaking the tension. Thomas returned to the risotto, adding the final ingredients while Olivia remained by the window, watching darkness settle over the forest. She thought about Boston, her half-empty apartment, the business she'd built, the life she'd planned. Then she thought about the past 10 days in Portland, how alive she'd felt exploring the city, how easily she laughed in Thomas's company, how the future had begun to seem full of possibilities rather than obligations. "The thing is," she said finally, joining him in the kitchen, "I'm not sure who I am yet either." "Not after everything that happened in Boston?" Thomas nodded, understanding immediately. "Then maybe that's something we could figure out together." No pressure, no timelines. He served the risotto, and as they ate, the conversation gradually returned to easier topics: books they loved, places they'd traveled, dreams they still harbored. But beneath it all ran a current of possibility that hadn't been there before, a question neither was quite ready to answer. Full circle. 6 months later, Olivia stood in the empty shell of what would soon become Bennett Interiors and Design, her finger tracing the freshly painted sign on the window overlooking Portland's Pearl District. Spring sunshine filtered through the tall industrial windows, illuminating the concrete floors and exposed brick walls that had first captured her imagination 3 months ago when the space became available. "Having second thoughts?" asked Naomi, her newly hired assistant and the first official employee of her Portland venture. "Not even close," Olivia replied, smiling as she surveyed the potential surrounding her. Just trying to believe this is really happening. After returning to Boston following her impromptu Portland trip, Olivia had thrown herself into rebuilding her life with unexpected clarity and purpose. She'd sold her share of the condo to Julian, moved into a smaller apartment in Cambridge, and begun the painstaking process of untangling their intertwined lives. More importantly, she'd reimagined her business, shifting focus from residential design to adaptive reuse of historic buildings, a passion she'd always harbored but had set aside to accommodate Julian's connections to luxury home developers. Throughout it all, she and Thomas had maintained their connection across 3,000 miles, daily texts, weekly video calls, and care packages filled with books he thought she'd enjoy, each inscribed with thoughtful notes relating the story to their evolving conversation. 2 months ago, when a major Portland developer had approached her about designing the interiors for a restored warehouse project after seeing her work featured in a design magazine, the universe had seemed to be offering her a sign. The 6-month contract would require her presence in Portland, and when Thomas offered the apartment above Foxglove Books as a temporary residence, the decision had practically made itself. The sound of footsteps on the hardwood pulled her from her thoughts as Thomas appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a brown paper bag that promised pastries from their favorite bakery. "The contractor says they can start on the custom shelving next Tuesday," he said, setting their breakfast on a makeshift table of plywood and sawhorses. "And the vintage lighting fixtures you wanted arrived at the store this morning." Olivia accepted the coffee gratefully. "You didn't have to coordinate all that. You have your own business to run. Partnership has its privileges," he said with a smile, referring to their arrangement, whereby his bookstore would occupy a cozy corner of her design studio, a symbiotic relationship that had evolved naturally from their discussions about creating spaces that nurtured both body and mind. Naomi discreetly excused herself to meet with the electrician, leaving them alone in the morning quiet. "I can't believe we're doing this," Olivia said, gesturing around them. 6 months ago, I couldn't see past the next day, and now you're building something beautiful." Thomas finished for her. "Something that's entirely yours." That wasn't entirely true, and they both knew it. While the business belonged to Olivia, what they were building together extended far beyond commercial ventures. Each day brought them closer to answering the question that had lingered since that rainy afternoon in Portland, what they might become together, given time and trust. "I got another offer yesterday," Olivia said, breaking a chocolate croissant in half to share. "A hotel chain in Boston. The contract would be 3 times what I'm making here." Thomas's expression remained neutral, though she caught the slight tension in his shoulders. "That's impressive. Are you considering it?" 6 months ago, she might have missed the vulnerability beneath his casual question. Now she recognized it immediately. "I turned it down this morning," she said simply. "Because of the business? Or because home isn't a place?" she replied, meeting his gaze directly. "It's a feeling. It's where you can be completely yourself and still be exactly where you belong." The space between them seemed to hold all the possibilities they'd been carefully navigating, the shared dinners that stretched into long conversations by the fireplace in his home, the professional collaboration that had revealed how seamlessly their strengths complemented each other's weaknesses, the cautious physical affection that had gradually evolved from friendly hugs to lingering touches and, finally, to that first tentative kiss 3 weeks ago on the Hawthorne Bridge. "So you're staying," he said, a statement rather than a question. "I'm staying," she confirmed. "Not because of you, or at least not only because of you. I'm staying because for the first time in my life, I'm building something that feels completely authentic to who I am." Thomas reached across the makeshift table, his fingers intertwining with hers. "That's all I've ever wanted for you, even if it had taken you back to Boston." Olivia squeezed his hand, recognizing the truth in his words. Unlike Julian, whose love had always seemed conditional on her fitting into his vision, Thomas had consistently encouraged her independence, even when it meant the possibility of losing her. Outside, Portland continued its morning rhythm. The clatter of the nearby streetcar, voices of pedestrians passing by, a street musician setting up on the corner. Olivia had fallen in love with this city's energy, its creativity, its embodiment of possibility. But more than that, she had fallen in love with the person she was becoming here, someone braver, more authentic, more willing to embrace uncertainty. And yes, someone who had opened her heart again, not out of need or convenience, but from a place of genuine connection. "I have a proposal," Thomas said, his eyes crinkling with the smile she'd grown to cherish. "Not that kind, not yet anyway. But what if we took a trip when the studio opens, back to where it all began?" "The airport?" Olivia laughed. "I was thinking more about spilled coffee and unexpected delays," he said. "About how sometimes the best journeys start with a collision you never saw coming." As morning light filled the empty space that would soon become their shared professional home, Olivia felt the final pieces of her new life clicking into place, not perfectly, not without uncertainty, but with a rightness that resonated through her entire being. "I'd like that," she said. "After all, I still owe you a clean shirt."